The centerpiece on the dining room table was my grandmother's old ceramic rooster, the one she brought from Ohio when she moved in with us the last 2 years of her life. My mother always put it out for Thanksgiving. It was her way of keeping her mother at the table even when she couldn't be. That Thursday, the table was full. My aunt and uncle had driven up from Charlottesville. My cousin brought a new boyfriend who spent most of the appetizer course asking questions about football that nobody could answer. My father had been in the kitchen since 7 that morning, and the whole house smelled like turkey fat and the rosemary he grows in a pot on the back porch. My husband was sitting next to me, already on his second glass of wine, quiet in the way he gets when he's watching something. My brother was at the head of the table, which wasn't tradition so much as accident. He'd pulled out the chair and sat down before anyone else had come in from the living room, and by the time everyone settled, it just looked intentional. He had that effect on rooms sometimes. He knew how to look like he belonged exactly where he was. He was 36 that November. He'd been working in financial consulting for a private firm in Boston for, as far as any of us knew, the past 4 years. Before that, he'd spent 2 years at a boutique investment advisory in New York, right after getting his MBA from a school in Connecticut that had a good name and cost my parents a number I'd only heard once, in a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. The scholarship had covered some of it, the rest had not been spoken about directly. But it was there, the way certain things in families are always there. He was doing well, he said, when people asked. The firm was growing. He'd recently moved to a bigger apartment. He was thinking about getting a dog. My husband's name is Leonard. He does not work in finance. He is an insurance fraud investigator, which is one of those jobs that sounds boring at a dinner party until someone starts telling you what it actually involves, and then it's hard to talk about anything else. He spent 11 years as a claims analyst before moving into the investigative side. He notices things. It is not something he turns off. He leaned toward me somewhere between the stuffing and the sweet potatoes. He didn't say anything for a moment. He just tilted his head slightly in my brother's direction, the way he does when he's filing something away. Then he said quietly, so that only I could hear, "When did he say he started at the Boston firm?" I told him. 4 years ago, right after he left New York. Leonard nodded once and looked back down at his plate. I waited. I knew enough to wait. "What was the name of the New York place again?" he asked. I told him that too. I'd heard my brother mention it at Christmas 2 years ago. Some advisory name I'd always found slightly forgettable. Leonard picked up his fork. "Okay," he said. "That was all. Just okay." I spent the rest of dinner pretending I hadn't noticed anything. I passed the gravy. I laughed at my uncle's story about the parking situation at his neighborhood Costco. I asked my cousin's boyfriend something about his job so he'd stop looking uncomfortable. But part of my attention had followed Leonard's one word across the table and settled somewhere near my brother, watching. My brother was charming that night. He usually was. He told a story about a client dinner in Boston where someone spilled an entire bottle of red wine on a senior partner's white dress shirt, and the partner just laughed and kept going, and it became this legend in the office. He told it well. He had the timing right, the pause before the punchline, the self-deprecating coda at the end. Everyone laughed, including my father, who doesn't laugh easily at dinner parties. After dessert, when my aunt was helping my mother in the kitchen and my uncle had fallen asleep in the armchair by the window, I found Leonard on the back porch. He was standing with his hands in his pockets, looking at the yard. "Tell me what you noticed," I said. He turned around. He looked at me for a moment like he was deciding something. "I don't want to make it a thing," he said. "It's already a thing. You made it a thing when you asked me at the table." He looked back at the yard. "I Googled the New York firm on my phone while you were getting the pie. I can't find any record of it. Not on LinkedIn, not through the SEC, not anywhere. A legitimate investory in New York is going to have some kind of public filing, some kind of registration. There's nothing." I didn't say anything. "It's probably nothing," he said. "You don't think it's nothing?" He didn't answer, which was its own answer. "I want to tell you that I went home that night and let it go. I want to tell you that I trusted my brother and decided that Leonard had misheard the name or searched wrong, or that the firm had closed and scrubbed its records for some legitimate reason. I didn't let it go. I have known my brother my whole life. I know the way he laughs when something is actually funny versus when he's performing laughter. I know that he chews the inside of his cheek when he's nervous. I know that he never, in 36 years, has once admitted he was wrong about anything in front of our father without a significant amount of pressure being applied first. I also know this. When he was 24, he applied to 5 MBA programs and got into 1. He told our parents he got into 3 and declined the other 2 because the program fit wasn't right. I know this because he told me the real version in the parking lot of a Chili's in Richmond during a weekend I drove down to visit him. He cried a little, which was unusual. He made me promise not to tell anyone. I never did. So I knew something about the architecture of the stories he built for our family. I understood they were not always the same as the truth. I spent the 2 weeks after Thanksgiving doing something I am not proud of and would not recommend. I was careful, and I was methodical, and I told myself the whole time that I was doing it because I cared about him, which was true, but was not the only thing that was true. I also did it because Leonard had said 3 words at a dinner table, and I couldn't unknow what they'd pointed at. The New York firm didn't exist. There was no registration, no address, no names attached to it anywhere that I could find. I searched variations of the name. I searched for him in combination with it. Nothing. The Connecticut MBA program was real. I found his name in an alumni directory, listed as a graduate from 9 years ago, which matched what he told us. That part was true. I searched for the Boston firm. It existed. It was a small but legitimate financial consulting company. 11 employees registered in Massachusetts with a clean public record and a modest LinkedIn presence. My brother's name was not on it, not as an employee, not in any past capacity, not in any way I could find. I hired no one. I ran no official searches. I am not a professional at this, and I want to be clear about that. But I grew up with a father who kept meticulous records, and a husband who spent more than a decade learning how institutions document themselves. And some of that had worn off on me. I knew what to look for and where to look, even if I didn't always know what it meant when I found it. I sat with what I had for 10 days. I called my brother twice during that time about unrelated things. His birthday was coming up. I wanted to know if he'd be back in town. And both times I heard something under his voice that I hadn't heard before, or hadn't let myself hear. A slight overbrightness, a pace that was almost right but not quite. I told Leonard what I'd found. He sat at the kitchen table and listened without interrupting, which is something he's good at. When I finished, he said, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know." "You do," he said. "You just don't like the options." He was right. I didn't like the options. Saying nothing meant carrying this alongside my brother without his knowing, which felt impossible. Telling my parents meant blowing something open that I couldn't put back together. Confronting my brother meant one of 2 outcomes, and I had rehearsed both of them in my head enough times to feel exhausted by them. I drove to Boston the 2nd Friday in December. I told my brother I wanted to take him to lunch, just the 2 of us. Early birthday celebration. He sounded pleased on the phone. He texted me a restaurant he liked in the South End, a place with good pasta and dim lighting. He was already there when I arrived. He had the good table by the window. He was wearing a blazer I hadn't seen before, dark green, and he looked like someone who was doing fine. He looked like someone who had, at considerable effort, constructed the appearance of someone who was doing fine. We talked about our parents for a while. We talked about our cousin's boyfriend who had announced his intention to propose in the spring. We ordered the pasta. The bread came. He poured me water without being asked, the way he's always done, a small automatic kindness that has nothing to do with anything else he is or isn't. I set my fork down. "I need to ask you something," I said. He looked at me. He knew my face. "Okay," he said. His voice was level. "Are you actually working at the firm you told us about?" He didn't look away. That was the thing about my brother. He didn't flinch, not externally, but I saw him chew the inside of his cheek. Just once, quickly. And then he was still. The silence between us lasted long enough that the waiter passed twice. "No," he said. It was the most alone I have ever felt in a restaurant full of people. I asked him to tell me. He asked me how I'd found out. I told him about Leonard noticing and about what I'd done afterward. And he listened to all of it with the look of someone receiving news they'd known was eventually coming from a direction they hadn't expected. And then he told for almost an hour. He had left the MBA program, not graduated. Left, 18 months in. Not expelled, not failed out, just quietly unable to continue. He'd had a breakdown that winter, which he had not called a breakdown at the time, because calling it that would have required him to tell someone it was happening. He described it to me as a long grey period, where he could not make himself do the work. Where he would sit in the library and stare at his laptop screen for 3 hours and produce nothing. Where he would sign up for study groups and then not go. He had put down enough money, done enough of the coursework, that the administrative paperwork of leaving was managed quietly, and he had received, eventually, a certificate of completion for a shorter non-degree program that sounded similar enough, if no one looked closely. His degree on his resume was not his degree. He had come home that Christmas 9 years ago and told our parents he had graduated. He had a framed document that looked right. Our mother had cried. Our father had shaken his hand. There had been a dinner at the good Italian place in Bethesda with the extended family, and someone had given a toast, and my brother had sat there and received all of it. After that, the story had to keep going. He moved to New York. He worked a series of jobs, none of them in the finance world the way our parents understood it, mostly operational and administrative work at mid-sized companies, the kind of work that paid adequately but had no particular story attached to it. He told our parents he was at the investment advisory. He researched enough to answer questions when they came. He kept the name vague enough that no one looked it up. 4 years ago, he moved to Boston. He had a legitimate job there, operations manager at a logistics company, good salary, real responsibilities. It was not consulting. It was not finance. But it was real work, and he was good at it, and he had stayed there, and he had built a real life inside it, with a real apartment and real friends, and a job his employer valued him for. He had just never told our family any of that. Why? I said. I knew why in the way you know why before someone explains it, but I asked anyway. He looked out the window. The street was grey, and the December light was thin, and for a moment he looked like the person he must have been in that library 9 years ago, staring at a screen. "Because I couldn't figure out how to stop," he said. By the time I thought about telling the truth, the lie had been going on so long that the truth seemed worse. Dad worked that extra job for 3 years to help cover my costs. Mom told everyone she knew. You understand what I mean. The story had already become part of what they were proud of. Stopping it felt like taking something away from them. I understood what he meant. I didn't agree with the logic exactly, but I understood how someone arrives at it. I asked about the money. I wanted to understand the full shape of it. He had taken some loan money originally, during the 18 months he was enrolled. He had repaid it eventually, through the years of working. He had not taken money directly from our parents beyond the initial period when they'd helped him cover living costs during school, which they'd done voluntarily and would have done anyway. He had not asked for money since. He had in fact quietly, in small amounts over several years, paid our father back for the extra costs without saying what it was for, just as help, when our father had a difficult year. Anonymous help, the way families sometimes pass money quietly. I sat with that. I didn't know what I'd expected, but it wasn't that. We didn't finish the pasta. The waiter came and went. At some point we ordered coffee we didn't drink. Outside, people walked past in coats with their hands in their pockets, living lives that had nothing to do with ours. "What do you want to do now?" he asked me. He was asking about our parents. He already knew I'd known for weeks and hadn't told them. He understood, without my saying it, that I had driven to Boston specifically to give him this chance. "I think you need to tell them," I said. He nodded very slowly. "I know," he said. "Not because what you did was unforgivable. I don't think it was. But because you've been carrying this for 9 years, and I can hear it. I could hear it at Thanksgiving even before Leonard said anything. And I think they can too, and they just don't know what they're hearing." He looked at me for a long moment. My brother, 36 years old, in a green blazer, in a dim restaurant in Boston with a plate of cold pasta between us. "Will you be there?" he said, "when I tell them?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be there. We drove down to our parents' house on a Saturday 10 days before Christmas. We didn't tell them we were coming together. I arrived first, under the pretense of dropping off something I'd borrowed. When my brother's car pulled up 20 minutes later, my mother's face did the thing it does when she's surprised but pleased. A quick, bright open look she doesn't fully control. He told them in the living room. Our father was in his usual chair. Our mother was on the couch next to me. I had my hand near hers, and at some point she found it without looking. My brother stood near the fireplace. He didn't pace. He didn't have notes. He talked for a long time, the same way he talked to me in Boston, and he told them nearly everything, and he was more honest than I had expected him to be. He told them about the library, about the grey period, about the framed document, about the years of maintenance. He did not minimize the part where they'd celebrated something that wasn't real. He said, "I know what that cost you both. I know what you gave. I'm sorry for all of it, and I'm sorry for all of it took me this long." My mother cried. Not loudly. She's not a loud crier. She held my hand and cried quietly and looked at my brother the whole time. My father didn't say anything for several minutes after my brother finished. Then my father said, "Do you like the job you actually have?" My brother blinked. Of everything he'd prepared for, I don't think he'd prepared for that. "Yes," he said, "I'm good at it." "Then that's something," my father said. "It was not forgiveness exactly, not yet. These things take time, and anyone who's been through a real rupture in a family knows that the conversation in the living room is not the last conversation. There were others in the weeks and months that followed that were harder and less clean. My father had a period where he was quiet in a way that was different from his usual quiet. My mother asked questions, sometimes the same questions more than once, working through the shape of something. There were phone calls between my brother and my parents that I was not part of and do not fully know, but they didn't let go of him. That's what I can tell you. They held on. He still lives in Boston. He still works at the logistics company, which promoted him last spring to a regional operations role that he's good at and that uses, actually, a fair amount of what he would have learned in that MBA he didn't finish. He told our parents about his actual friends, his actual neighborhood, the coffee shop where he goes on Sunday mornings, the small life he'd built inside the larger lie. My mother asks about all of it now. She wants the real version. He does not have the dog yet. He says he's thinking about it. What I have thought about, in the months since that December Saturday, is the cost of the shape of things versus the shape of things themselves. My brother built an elaborate version of a life that looked the way our family needed it to look, and he maintained it at enormous personal expense for 9 years. The exhaustion of that must have been significant, the loneliness of it, having a real life that no one in your family knew about. Achievements that were genuine that you couldn't share because sharing them would invite questions. That part, to me, is the saddest part. The job he actually has, he's good at. He always was. Whatever happened in that library in Connecticut, it didn't change what he was capable of. I have thought about Leonard and the way he said one word on Thanksgiving, just okay, and looked back at his plate. He has told me since that he wasn't certain about anything that night, that it was just a thread he noticed and filed away, and that he said something to me not because he thought he was right, but because he thought I would want to know there was a thread. That's what he said. I thought you would want to know. He was right. I did want to know. even though knowing cost me weeks of sitting with something difficult and a long drive to Boston and an afternoon of cold pasta and hard conversation. I wanted to know because my brother was at the center of our family table every holiday, and I wondered what was there to be real. It is now, or it is becoming real. That's the closest I can get to honest about where we are. The ceramic rooster is still on the table at Thanksgiving. My grandmother bought it at an estate sale in Columbus in 1987. She paid $4 for it. My mother has kept it for 30 years because it was her mother's, and her mother thought it was funny, and some things you keep not because they're beautiful, but because they carry someone with them. That's what family is, I think. Not the version you present. The thing underneath that you keep anyway, even when it costs you something, even when it asks more of you than you expected. My brother called me last Sunday. He didn't need anything. He just called to talk the way we used to before the years when every call had to have a certain shape to it. We talked for an hour about nothing much. About the city. About our cousin's engagement, which is now official. About a show we'd both been watching. Before he hung up, he said, "Thank you for driving up." I said it wasn't anything. He said it was, though. And I said, "I know." I have thought about cause and effect a lot since that December. Not in any dramatic way, not like I'm trying to assign blame or build a case. Just the quiet way you trace something backward after it's over, the way you follow a thread and find where it started. My brother made one decision 9 years ago in a library in Connecticut to not tell the truth about what was happening to him. That one decision required another decision to maintain it, and that decision required another. And so on for 9 years, until the whole structure of it was so large that he couldn't see over the top of it. That's the thing about the small choices. They don't stay small. They compound. They become the architecture of your days. What I keep coming back to is that my brother is not a dishonest person. That sounds strange to say, given everything, but I mean it. The lie he told was not the product of a character that wanted to deceive. It was the product of a person who is afraid, who loved his family, who could not figure out how to say, "I am struggling, and I need you to see me as I actually am, not as the version you've been hoping for." He chose the version they were hoping for because he thought it was what they needed, and then he could not undo it. That gap between who we actually are and who we think the people we love need us to be, that's where I think the real damage happens. Not in dramatic betrayal, in the quiet daily cost of performing a life instead of living one. What I admire, looking back, is what my brother did when the thread finally got pulled. He could have denied it. He could have given me a partial truth and bought himself more time. Instead, he sat across from me in a restaurant in Boston and told me the whole shape of it, including the parts that didn't make him look good, including the parts he was ashamed of. That took something real. That took the kind of courage that is not dramatic. It doesn't look like courage from the outside. It just looks like a man sitting quietly and telling the truth after a very long time of not being able to. And my father. I think about what my father said. "Do you like the job you actually have?" He didn't ask about the degree. He didn't ask about the money, or the years, or the dinners where they'd toasted something that wasn't real. He asked whether the life his son was actually living had any worth in it. That question, I think, was the most generous thing I have ever seen my father do. It required him to let go of what he'd been proud of and ask about what was actually there. Not everyone can do that. Not everyone, in a moment of hurt, chooses the question that reaches toward rather than the one that pushes away. I don't think any of this was inevitable. I don't think the outcome was fixed. Every person in that living room that Saturday had a choice, and every one of them chose to stay in the room. That matters. It doesn't erase 9 years, but it changes what comes next. I've thought a lot about what I would tell someone who was sitting where my brother was sitting, who was carrying something they're sure their family cannot hold. And the only honest thing I can say is, you don't actually know what the people who love you are capable of until you give them the chance. My brother thought he was protecting our parents. What he was actually doing was deciding on their behalf what they could survive, And he was wrong about that. They were stronger than the story he'd built to shield them from the truth. That's the thing about honesty. It asks something of you, and it asks something of the people around you. But what it gives back, the lightness of it, the ability to finally be known, that's not nothing. That's actually most of it.